Hello, you're listening to the 805 Uncensored podcast hosted by two leftists, recorded on Shumash land. This podcast covers a variety of topics from music to politics, news, and spirituality. Issues both in the 805 and ones affecting the 805. There are no limits, which is why we are uncensored, so welcome. And please follow us on your podcast and social media platforms of choice. This episode, we are excited to welcome someone that we connected to on TikTok, Zack Rouse. Zack makes videos with a lot of different types of advocacy on kind of a lot of things that are really important to us and that we think are important to talk about. So welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So that was actually our first thing is why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Like I said, we connected on TikTok, but we'd like to just know more about like how you got started, what your goals are there, how you politically identify.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm an actor and a musician by trade, and so I went to school for acting and for music for saxophone. And my parents were journalists, career journalists, and my dad wrote for the LA Times for many years, and my mom was on Southern California radio for many years, and so I kind of got this sense of curiosity about current events and politics and all that stuff. And probably if I was to go back to do it, if I was to be young again, which will never happen, um, I'd probably go for something like history and you know, uh, maybe for politics and that kind of stuff. So it's always been an interest of mine, keeping up with current events and stuff. And as I'm Gen X, I'm 47, and so I've kind of seen from the entirety of my life, I've basically seen that capitalism doesn't work, and so I'm kind of been on this trajectory of watching it grind slowly toward hell ever since I've been conscious. And so going through that process has been a really interesting thing to note. And there's a lot of intricacies to it, and it's very compartmentalized in some ways. And so it's in some ways it's really exciting, but in some ways it's also really frightening. So I've been kind of paying attention to that. Basically, the only news I pay attention to these days, besides paying attention to my phone feed, Reuters and stuff like that, is Democracy Now! And Vice News, which I understand Vice is in trouble right now, so that's tough. The Intercept, I pay attention to them, and then I pay attention to some of the other stuff too, against my own better judgment and will. So anyway, that's kind of a little background. I live in Northern California, very far Northern California in Humboldt County. Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of theater, and also, just kind of trying to keep up on stuff and be on TikTok and try to post as much as I can about solidarity economics and paradigm shift and all that stuff.
Our next question kind of for you is, can you describe for us what solidarity economics is? Is there a difference between solidarity economics and mutual aid? And why do you think it's important to educate the public about this concept?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think that mutual aid and solidarity economics are pretty much the same thing, as far as I can tell. My biggest sort of qualm with saying mutual aid would be this sort of framing of the word aid in terms of framing us all the citizenry as victims of something that needs to be aided. Um, I think that kind of takes away our agency, and so I'd love to return agency to the people, which I know a lot of us are feeling like we don't have agency and like we don't have the power, but we really do. We're the ones with the power. We just don't know it, and so we need to take that sense of agency back. But in terms of the solidarity economics, the basic definition is people and planet before profits. So it essentially says that an economy exists to serve a people, not the other way around. So right now we have a system where the citizenry props up the system and is there to essentially feed the system. And that doesn't work for anyone except the people who are running the system. And so it makes a lot more sense for the system to be reconfigured to serve the people, which is what it's there for. An economy is specifically there to create a thriving environment for the people that it serves. It is a servant of the people. So solidarity economics, there's a lot of elements to it. One element would sort of be like community garden spaces, right? So, and community ownership over everything. So there's not really a sense of like, oh, I own this plot of land and I'm going to put a parking lot here because I can charge $15 a day to every single car that's going to park here and make money and enrich myself. It's this land is here and the people need to be served by it. Let's turn it into a community garden and grow food. And everybody spends 4 hours a week in the friggin' thing. So it's not one person trying to manage a whole garden themselves. It's not even 5 people. It's everybody pitching 4 hours in per week. It's not that much or whatever it is. And working together. Another example of a solidarity economics principle is a tool lending library. So you'd have everybody's got some extra tool. You've got two pliers, you've got 2 wrenches, you've got 2 hammers. I know I do. We could just take the extra, put it into this tool lending library, and if somebody needs a hammer, they go over and they borrow the hammer until they don't need it, and then they bring it back. Another thing is community banking. If you have a group of people who all pitch in $5, say you've got 100 people who all pitch in $5 to loan to somebody $500 so they can pay their rent or do whatever they need to do, the repayment rate on microloans is like 99.99 something percent. I mean, it's absolutely astounding how good micro lending works. That's another thing. But as far as like what I'd like to see, I would like to see solidarity economics removing a currency altogether, because what I would like to see is everybody just doing what they do, working together directly, as opposed to using this abstract middleman called money, because the banking system is taking such advantage, and they clearly have shown themselves not to be responsible enough to handle the citizens' money, that if we take that out of their hands by getting rid of money altogether and just work directly with each other, we're going to be a lot more successful ultimately. So anyway, those are some examples of solidarity economics. Ultimately, it's about everybody getting together with their local communities and ultra localizing. If we can ultra localize, meaning you don't get shit shipped to you from China if you can at all help it. And I'm guilty of it. This sweater came from Target. It's like, you got to go buy a sweater. You're not necessarily going to get a sweater that was sewn locally where you're at, but that needs to change. There could be a community sewing lab. You know what I mean? Everything has a solution. There's always a solution. So
yeah, I feel like some people already do some of this too. Like our old neighborhood where we just moved from, they have like a text group chat where if somebody needs like a certain herb or a certain vegetable, they just text the group chat, and then whoever has it says, "Oh yeah, I've got to come over and get it." And I feel like people do this on like some level, and it maybe would just take like educating people to understand that they're already doing it in some respect, if that makes sense.
100%. That's absolutely right. People are already doing all of this to some degree, and it's really just about stepping it up so that essentially when the total infrastructure, when the political infrastructure fails, the social infrastructure is strong enough to just step in and function properly. And that's what we hope for, and that's kind of what I'm on TikTok for, is like to get people aware that they need to start preparing for that, and there's going to be some things we're going to have to go without, like probably coffee. You're going to have to go without coffee for a while until the global warming creates the scenario in which you can grow a ton of coffee plants in your area. You know what I mean? So bananas, certain areas won't have bananas, certain areas won't have, certain things. It's just the way it goes. But we all came from where we're at. It's like we know how to survive. People know how to survive. We're animals. We're not far from that. We just think we are.
So, do you think that we as we see capitalism fall, that this concept of solidarity economics and helping each other out in the sense of community is going to become more important? And do you think that ultimately that Americans are capable of this?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know if Americans are capable of surviving the apocalypse, the economic apocalypse that's coming. People who storm the Capitol, I don't think they would last very long, honestly. They seem like they're kind of barking up the wrong tree. So, it's funny because in crisis mode, you really see people's true colors. And one of the things that I've noticed is, like, in large earthquakes, for instance, like this past December, we had a 6.4 here in Humboldt, and it knocked the power out for like 2 days, and like everything was toast for a minute. And I was in the Northridge earthquake in 1994, and that was pretty comparable. It was like 7.1. Everything was toast for months. And the people who came out to help each other, this mutual aid concept, we were all victims at that time. The people who came out of the woodwork to help each other, you could tell who was capable and who was not capable, and you'll be able to know real quick who you're going to have to prop up versus who is going to be able to be self-sufficient and carry more than their weight. And you hope for balance. We're all here, so clearly there's already balance in place, right? Nobody's not here who shouldn't be here. And so even the people who are less capable of, say, lifting 50 pounds or, getting on their hands and knees and tilling soil, those people will have something to offer. And you just have to figure out what it is. And you might have a few rare cases of people who really truly aren't capable, and they just have to be propped up. I think older people, big one's going to be with older people, helping them. Because the boomer generation's aging out right now, and there's a billion of them. So, they're all going to need help in the next 20, 30 years. So that'll be kind of our job to help them out.
What do you think is going to be like the catalyst for this? Because like our next group of questions is about AI, and we just had an AI panel.
That's cool.
Over the weekend. And I think that the general consensus of the group is that AI is just going to make the collapse of capitalism in the United States as we kind of know it come very quickly. And I've even noticed in the last couple days, big political creators and commentators are kind of seeming like they're resigned and accepting that it's happening now, like in real time. And so what do you think is like going to be the catalyst for, is it AI?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, chances are it's political. But essentially, like, I could see a few different scenarios. One scenario is basically that we sort of just grind downward and shrink. Like MIT did this, the study in '72 called the Limits to Growth, and then the statistician redid it in 2019. Her name is Gaia Harrington, Herrington, and she kind of corroborated their projections. But their projections were basically that society is going to start to shrink about between 2040 and 2050, and I think that's been accelerated by COVID, and it's probably going to be accelerated, like you said, by AI too. But I think that by 2030 we're hitting peak production in the whole world economy, and then at that point it's going to start to shrink. So one scenario is that basically between now and the year 2100, we basically see population, pollution, industrial output, monetary sort of the banking juggernaut start to shrink. We see everything start to shrink, and then it shrinks on a very quick trajectory toward 2100, where the economy will at that point look basically like it did in 1900. So that's a huge, fast drop, which is really exciting for me because I'm like, yeah, that's what we need. We absolutely need an implosion, a natural implosion of growth, so that it we can't like get completely out of control. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is, fuck, what if aliens show up? I mean, wouldn't that be awesome if they're like, nah, screw you guys. You know what I mean? They're like, you don't deserve it. We put you in the petri dish long enough, and now we're gonna yank you out and do something else with you. I mean, that'd be friggin' awesome. I would love to see that in my lifetime. That's another scenario, I guess. Another one would be like political explosion, like somebody like Putin on his way out, starting a nuclear third world war. I mean, that's totally within the realm of possibility. So there's a few different things that could happen, and AI is really interesting, right? Because it's such a mixed bag. It's like I've been watching these guys, Lex Friedman podcasts and stuff, where he's talking to the AI guys, and they're so cool. But they're real. They're like, we don't know what we've done, guys. We're kind of in uncharted waters now, and we're nervous. We'd really like you to regulate us. I don't think regulation is going to happen. I think it's too late for that. I mean, I went into Chat GPT and had it write me a screenplay. It was a terrible screenplay, but at least it wrote it for me. Wrote me like a bunch of scenes. I was like, oh, I could totally turn this into a Stephen King novel if I wanted to. You know what I mean? So it can already do a lot of things, and I'm sure that the versions of AI that they've rolled out to us aren't anywhere near what's like the military has and all this stuff. I think it's probably too late. It's probably too late. And the question is it going to be like Terminator, or is it going to take some time for it to become like Terminator, or the Matrix? Is there any way around it? I just don't know. I mean, we may have to leave the planet, and I don't know, or maybe they'll leave the planet. Maybe AI will leave the planet. But also, the paradigm is shifting right now. And what happens if, you could look at it like this. What happens if AI and us are actually the same thing? There's no difference between us and AI. We're just basically making a baby. And so there's no difference in terms of the net effect of consciousness continuing, whether there's organic physical life here or not. It'll probably just re-evolve. AI will just re-evolve it. So, I think you're just in endless cycles of consciousness recreating itself and weaving its way through time space. So anyway.
So
sorry, guys.
No, it's great. We actually had a bunch of AI questions, but you just covered all of them because it's
sorry.
There's so much that we don't know. I think that's really fundamentally what it is about AI is there's just a lot that we don't know. And
yeah.
Whereas with like other things, you can like model and predict what's going to happen. I think that that's where we're at is like the inability to do that.
Yeah.
So you've talked a lot about what is coming with worldwide economic collapse by the year 2030. And several months ago, you even posted on my TikTok, what are you doing to prepare for 2030?
Uh-huh.
And so can you talk to us about this a little bit and like why you think it's important for people, like what people should be preparing for and why you think it's important that they prepare?
Sure. So I think there's going to be a compartmentalization that's going to happen in this continent, right? So our continent is, I think, too big to house just one country. It's like, the size of Europe essentially, or the size of China. There's many countries within our little country. And a lot of them have different ideas of how things are supposed to be done. And that's probably okay. That's probably right. So, I could definitely see bioregions splitting off from each other eventually as the Fed sort of loses its teeth. Right now you're watching Florida basically shut the Fed down, and the Fed's and you're watching Biden, and he's just like, what, he doesn't even, it's like he doesn't even notice that Florida is falling into the abyss, but they're just like shutting the Fed down. So the Fed is basically useless in Florida unless it's going to send in military. Same thing with like Tennessee, Nebraska. All these states are just like going by the wayside. So I could definitely see like a Handmaid's Tale style, like recarving of the continent, where you've got like Gilead over here, and you've got like the Canadians trying to keep things together. I think that's really generous. That's nice. It's kind of funny the way they have the Canadians being the nice place to go. But yeah, in terms of the collapse, what Gaia Harrington, there's two models that MIT and then Gaia Harrington talk about. One model is called business as usual. And that's basically where we don't do anything about climate change. We don't do anything about trying to slow growth. We don't do anything about resource management. We just go full bore at the wall. And we see total collapse between 2040 and 2050, which is like a total economic collapse, basically, where then you just are on your own. You go to Rite Aid and the shelves are empty. The store might be open and they're like, oh, they have a little a little sign taped to the door. Sorry, no product today. Come back tomorrow. We'll see. And then the other model is called comprehensive technology. And the comprehensive technology model is really interesting. It basically says that with the advent of technologies like AI and, like hydroponics and all this stuff, that you have the potential to kind of stave off the worst effects of the collapse, so that even though you do end up having a collapse that's like the business as usual collapse, with comprehensive technology, it can kind of stave off the worst effects of it. So you might have, some kind of resources to deal with your stuff, pockets of like areas where there's still like full medical services and things like that, and like stores that function and stuff. And you might have to travel from the rural areas, just like you do now, but where you travel from the rural areas to sort of more business oriented areas to get your stuff done. And so they said that basically these two models are the ones that track most closely with the trajectory that we're on, and that that basically about 2030 we hit peak production in terms of industry. So the full industrial growth, that upside down V, where we're trying to grow like this, stops at 2030 and then starts to kind of implode back on itself. And by 2100, we're back to the size of an economy of 1900, and the size population and everything. You're already seeing China starting to shrink. You're already seeing Italy starting to shrink. You're seeing Japan having a really hard time maintaining population. The United States, you can tell there's less babies being made in the United States. I think everything we're already on this path. And I think by 2030, it's probably going to become pretty clear that everything is starting to shrink. And that's a good thing, because what it means is that the amount of resources that we have right now, I mean, how many friggin' shirts and blouses are there just sitting in warehouses right now? And they just keep making more and more and more. I mean, we've got enough clothes for probably 4 generations in a row. I mean, it's insane how much shit there is in all these warehouses. So anyway, yeah, I think that's kind of how I see it. I kind of see it compartmentalizing, where you've got pockets of functionality and then pockets of anarchy. And there's a difference between anarchism and anarchy. I think that that all systems eventually they fail and they return to anarchism, which is complete social rule. Anarchy is where you've got people running amok in the streets, right? And I think that you'll have that for a while, but then you'll get people starting to self-manage, and the self-management is what I call anarchism. And that's the actual neutral system of existence in life. Humanity should naturally just manage itself. It already does. You don't need some religion or dogmatic capitalistic structure to tell you what to do every day. You don't need that. Anyway, yeah, thanks. It's rant. I can rant forever, man. So I hope it collapses, but I also hope that it collapses in a gentle way. And it appears as if both Democrats and Republicans are on the trajectory to have it collapse in a violent way. And I'm concerned that that's where we're headed. And I don't want to see that, but we very well could see it. we very well could see a civil war happen. I mean, we already saw it on January 6th. It was an attempt at a civil war that failed miserably because they're such doofuses. But anybody with any organizational skills, I mean, that's essentially the banking class. The banking class and the Democrats working together is basically a civil war from inside. They're basically turning us into renter bots, so we can't own anything anymore. We're constantly in debt. I mean, they started this in the 70s with credit cards, where they put us in a situation where they stopped raising real wages and they allowed you to take on more and more debt, right? That's on purpose. It wasn't accidental. They set us up to fail. They set us up to be in a situation where we had to fill the gap between what we were making and what we needed with debt. So that's where we're at now. That's why everybody has a bunch of debt. So that's what these guys are doing. And they're ushering in anarchy because they're idiots. They're not ushering in anarchism, which is what should happen. Solidarity economics is basically anarchism.
I think you should go ahead and ask your question about fascism, because I think like everything that you're saying, Zach, directly leads into this topic.
So moving on to the anarchy, that I mean, I think I agree with you, that they are pretty determined at this point to just make this as chaotic and uncomfortable for everyone as possible. So is fascism part of the scheme with the banks to try and either avoid world economic collapse, or more likely get out with, like, as much as they can? Like, my whole thing is like, is it the rats trying to take as much as they can, just get, like, squeeze every last penny out of us as they possibly can? Is fascism like their plan to do that, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that there's a couple things going on, right? I think they think that they can prevent the collapse with fascism. I think that they think if they can just control us better, if they're just a little better at controlling us, that they'll be able to sort of stave off the worst effects of the collapse, right? That if they can just put us in the little box that is more convenient for them, they can just push us around, do the things that they need us to do, right? Like go to a corporate job and, help keep AI going or whatever it is, keeps goods and services flowing. And they'll just keep us just making just below what we need to make. Then they keep the carrot in front of you the whole time, your whole life. And they if they can do that for another few generations until we're sort of down to a smaller scale, or if they can introduce viruses and shit like that to like help us keep the trajectory going downward. I think that they think that it'll work out better for them. And I think they're very short-sighted. They really don't care about humanity in general. I think they think this is a weird psychological trick that rich people do to themselves. They think they're not in charge, but they also think they're in charge. They think they've got the money and the resources to be in charge, but they don't ultimately think there's some godhead or something that's like ruling everything, and that they're really just an individual player doing the best they can. I mean, that's always the line they give you. Oh, it's just business. I'm just doing business. I'm just doing the best I can. It's not, it's not my fault. I didn't make the rules. I'm just playing by them. That's always their friggin' excuse. So, but the thing is, I think if they can keep us under their thumbs, they think if we've got sports to watch every day, this endless cycle of sports and entertainment, if they can keep making the same friggin' story over and over again for us to watch, that we'll just kind of sit on our couches and entertain ourselves while they manage everything. So that's as far as I can tell why we're headed toward fascism. But fascism is a complicated issue in our modern time, because there's physical fascism, which is what Republicans want. And then there's sort of lexical and thought fascism of thought that's coming from the centrist fundamentalists. And this is a real issue for me, because I'm liberal, and all these people in the center are trying to tell me what I can and cannot talk about, how I can and cannot frame my conversations because I'm saying the wrong words. That's incorrect. I want substantive justice, not rhetorical justice. So substantive justice is where we actually get nuts and bolts justice for marginalized groups that have been abused for decade upon decade. I don't care if I say the wrong word and I say something, I give somebody the wrong pronoun. Should they cancel me for giving them the wrong pronoun? No, they should just gently educate me and move the fuck on. You know what I mean? That's what I do. When I wear dresses and skirts and high heels and all kinds of shit, and people are like, how do you like to be referred to? And I go, oh, thank you so much for asking. I'm a dude in a dress. You know what I mean? I don't take it personally. They just don't know what to call me. So for me to try to demand that they talk to me the way I want them to talk to me is inappropriate. And that's what the center is doing, because they are okay with corporate rule. They're just not, they want you to say the right words so that you appear to be on the right side of history. Actual liberalism wants total freedom for everybody and inclusion for everyone, including the people you don't agree with. And you have to have the people you don't agree with in the conversation. If you don't, that's not a conversation. You're just in a tunnel. So anyway, did I answer the question? Was that
No, you totally did. But like
okay.
one of my questions for you, Zach, is how do you define fascism? And like, do you see America becoming a purely fascistic country? And how does or will that look? And when do you see that happening in concurrence, like with 2030 or like within the next like several years?
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be compartmentalized. I think you're going to see fascism in certain pockets of the country, and I think you're going to see anarchism starting to kind of take hold in other parts of the country, right? So I think in areas like Florida, you're already seeing fascism. It already exists. You already saw, in Kentucky and Tennessee, all these legislatures, Montana, you're already seeing fascism existing, and it already existed before. We just thought we had democracy, right? These yahoos who are in there and have had a stranglehold on the legislatures in these areas, they have had a stranglehold on those areas since the beginning. Those are the privileged assholes who've been deciding how everybody's going to have to behave. And the reason they're bucking, pardon the pun, the reason they're bucking is because there's actual liberals who want real change showing up in their legislatures now. And now there's a backlash. So they're fighting against it. They want to try and stop it. In some cases, they'll probably succeed. I don't know if they'll succeed in Florida. But the thing is, I don't think you're going to escape it just by voting Democrat. You're not going to escape it so you have fascism in one sense where people are banning books, but then you have fascism in another sense where they say you've got two choices. Diet fascism, exactly. You've got two choices, but they're packaged in 8 or 10 logo packages, right? So Colgate versus whatever the other toothpaste is, and then you put a different package on it, and all of a sudden you've got a third, fourth, fifth, 12th brand, right? It's all about branding, and essentially we're under the thumb of the banks. So I call that fascism, because if I have to go and work a 9-to-5 job in order to survive, that is completely out of the realm of what I do as a human being. I'm just a placeholder for an activity. I'm not doing anything that is actually what I do as a human being. Isn't that fascism? I mean, isn't that me being controlled by the system? I mean, I don't really see how capitalism is that different from what people define as fascism anyway. There's just not genocide happening. But I mean, who knows? But anyway, actual like, okay, you're going to camps, fascism. I mean, that kind of stuff. I don't know if we're going to see that. If we do see it, my guess is we're going to see it soon, like in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see it starting to happen. But I really hope we don't see that. I just, I mean, it's already the case, right, that African Americans don't get home loans at nearly the rate that white people do. So, I mean, they know that the American dream is a fallacy and has never been a reality. They've always known that it wasn't a reality because it's never been a reality for them.
But racism's over and it's a total equal playing field now.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we're in a post-racial society. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's a bunch of different ways to talk about fascism, right?
Yeah.
But I just don't want to see. I mean, the banning of books is a fucking huge one. The killing of a Washington Post journalist, the cutting up and killing of a Washington Post journalist. I mean,
Yeah.
with the sanctioning of the government of that paper. I mean, what else can you say? It's like the U.S. is okay with a lot of nonsense. So I think as long as they can keep the banking system flowing, they're going to keep trying.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt in our minds that the anti-trans legislation being echoed across the country is straight up fascistic and genocidal. Um, but one of our questions is, do you think that the American public as a whole actually understand the implication?
I guess maybe the 80-20 rule would apply. Say maybe 80% of the population doesn't really understand the full implications. Like even my parents who are, they're boomers, they're in their 70s. I don't think they fully grasp it. And I try to talk to them about it every time we talk. I try to say, oh, fascism is afoot. It's happening. And they kind of go, oh yeah, you're right. But I know it's like, they're just tired. They're like, I've seen everything. We were protesting the Vietnam War, and so we know that things ebb and flow, and it's just going to keep ebbing and flowing just like it always has. And I don't think they really do. I think even the educated, I mean, look at how you got the Third Reich, right? There was a lot of people who just were in denial. They just sat there and they were like, day to day, I'm just going to go and run my little business and do my thing. And then all of a sudden it creeped in. And then all of a sudden you're at this place where your neighbors are starting to disappear, and this happens in many countries. I mean, it's like the Philippines, this kind of shit's been happening for decades where people just go missing and you're like, oh, where's my neighbor? I never see him again. Oh, now the neighbor's kid just disappeared. I mean, that happens here too. But it's just not as like, it's kind of hidden. It's like, if the CIA wants to disappear you're gone. But
yeah, no, and that's really what it feels like to me too. Like we're straight up in like 1930s Berlin.
It feels that way. It really does.
So our next question is actually, is the U.S. a failed state? If so, you mentioned the Civil War or the verge of civil war. We had the failed attempt at a civil war. Although, I mean, I personally think we're in a civil war. I just think it's not like a hand-to-hand combat kind of thing. But what are your thoughts? I mean, are we on the verge of a civil war? Is it a failed state? Is there hope? What are you thinking about this?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's compartmentalized, right? So this is a failed state for people of color entirely, and it always has been, right? Because of the fact that we live in an apartheid system. It's now becoming a failed state for all people basically who aren't wealthy. Try to go get social services and see how functional that system is. Trying to get social services. Go try to get a loan for anything and watch the process unfold and see how functional or dysfunctional that is. I mean, in some ways you could absolutely make an argument that we are living in a failed state. And this is certainly a failed state for poor people. Poor people, this is absolutely a failed state. And when you look at those income graphs that they show, right? Those income graphs where they show like even people who are up to, multi-million dollars in assets and cash fluidity are basically at the same level as the rest of us. And then the truly wealthy are billionaires, and they're the ones that run everything. So I think it is. I think we live in a failed state.
I mean, I
Um,
also look at like day-to-day life. Like we connected on TikTok, right? And what do you
Yeah.
see on TikTok all the time? You see people posting about just like a failure of like our system to provide for and take care of people. Like right now, the thing on TikTok is about all these drug shortages. Like, how do you not call that a failed state? Like, I can't go to CVS and get allergy medicine, and there are all these people that can't get their like stuff for their mental health treatments. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, how is that not a failed state? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
can people have this much struggle and not see that as a failure, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even super simple things like say you've got $10,000 in the bank and you want to do something with it. The IRS is paying attention to your use of $10,000. That's hardly any money at all in the grand scheme of things. It's like if you can't even have control over your own money, you live in a failed state. If you don't have the agency over your own movements, you live in a failed state. And it's only a matter of time before the guillotine comes out. And the problem is they've been scrambling the airwaves with so much nonsense that we're so blindsided by all of the different like fake angles, right? That we think that Biden is like the great white hope. We think he's the one. It's like, oh, you got to just vote for Biden because there's no other choice. There's no other choice. You're going to have Ron DeSantis,
I don't think that.
Yeah, I know.
You know, we don't have a question about it, but because you just mentioned the guillotine and the ten, you know, the money. What is your thinking is going to happen with this debt ceiling thing? Because
That's a good
mm,
question.
I just saw that they're saying that like Social Security recipients are going to get their money, and I mean I have one that lives with me, and he doesn't get his check next month. He loses his health insurance.
Yeah, that's very
mm.
scary.
So
I mean,
what? So what do you? So I mean, do you think it's going to get resolved? Do you think that'll be the moment? Do you think it's going to dip? Because it might default, and that might be the moment, right? But the
it,
people that
it
rely on
could.
that money, will they be able to make it the moment?
Yeah, no, those guys won't. I mean, the older people won't be able to do anything. It'll be all of the younger people who have to kind of get out in the streets and as long as there's shit on the shelves and it's cheap enough. I mean, this is the Walmart model. As long as there's shit on the shelves, there's something new to watch on television, uh, um, and you've got just enough to get your Taco Bell or McDonald's or whatever you need to get at the store for that week. Nobody is going to get out in the streets. The second shelves are bare, and the second you have a bread line like Russia in the 90s, the second you have that, you're going to start to see some shit change. And so I think they're trying to stave that off, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. The debt ceiling thing is huge. I mean, the Republicans are trying to hold it hostage. I think the Democrats are going to win it, but it's just kicking the can down the road.
I
How
mean,
much longer?
I would argue that we had those bread lines during COVID,
Yeah.
and nothing.
Or even now,
Yeah,
look at the lines of
like
food share.
what? It's because we don't have the class consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right that we don't. So how do we wake up? How do we get everybody to wake up and get that 100th monkey moving?
That's my question for you, and it's always kind of been in my mind. And when I've talked to other comrades, it's like, we hate to say it, but it's because material conditions are not bad enough. There's still enough people out there that can feed their families. There's still enough people out there that can send their kids to college. There's not enough people out there that have been severely negatively impacted by the economic crisis. And I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
the main issue is. And when that happens,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see people rise up. You'll see people get into the streets. But like still, like, you see what's going on in France, and I see like I think really like that's the main reason why we have this major censorship push against TikTok is because the US government does not want American citizens to see uprisings of citizens around the world against their governments.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's in a way you're sort of like, how did Elon get a hold of Twitter? Because the Arab Spring happened on Twitter. That was before TikTok, right? Did he get? Did he have a backer in that so he could kind of run it into the ground so it couldn't serve that function anymore? You know,
Right.
who knows? I think we have to, if TikTok, like there's Clapper, which I think is really kind of a silly version, a silly version of TikTok. But Clapper will keep going for a while because it's flying under the radar still. But there's like so much MAGA bullshit on there. But still,
Yeah.
like you could put anything on there. You could put anything on Clapper. And it's kind of a cool platform. It's laid out exactly like TikTok. I think staying public and also just getting out into the streets is really a big thing. Like we need to have regular meetings, like regular conversations like this, and in places like bars and community centers and classes where people are talking about politics. I mean, the whole thing is we got to get into solidarity mode. We can't be in this sort of like, oh well, I paid the mortgage, so I'm less concerned now. I'm safe because my mortgage is
Right.
paid this month.
Exactly. And that's like the main gist of why we wanted to ultimately have this conversation is because like we're so fucking like deeply ingrained in this country to be like individualized to like the highest extent possible. So how do we ultimately move away from that so that we can move together and develop some sort of solidarity and class consciousness, because otherwise we're ultimately just going to destroy this country if not kill off ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you may be right that what's going to happen is we're all going to have to starve for a while. That might be what's going to happen. I really, this is what Bernie has been trying to prevent, and that's why he keeps going. I mean, he's older than dirt, and he just keeps going because he's like, I can't
Right,
stop.
like I hope I'm wrong, but like it just seems like that's the way that things have to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it also is. I think it's also going to look different for other people because, like, for some people, it's that they can't feed their families, which a lot of people are unable to do right now. But
Mm-hmm.
again, like, I keep thinking about this medication thing because more and more medications are becoming unavailable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not stuff for people that are like chronically ill necessary. It's shit like Tylenol.
Mm-hmm.
And you're gonna only have, like, I'm a mom and I have 3 kids, and if I get to a point where I cannot access like Motrin or Tylenol and one of my kids is sick, that's when I'm gonna start to get really, really, really angry.
Mm-hmm.
And
No,
I
that's
could
that's
see
a
a lot
really
of
good
parents
point.
doing that.
Really good point, Heather. Like I remember over the last fall and winter when there was a cold and a flu going around here in Ventura County, and you would go to every single
Yeah.
CVS or Walgreens, and you could not find any medication whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
mean, how is that not a type of starvation, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
people can only take so much of that.
right,
Yeah. So I guess timelines are kind of the thing, right? Like how far away are we from hitting critical mass with it? And right now we're in kind of this moment of this watershed moment of the veil getting thinner. I think partly because of COVID and partly just because the paradigm is shifting. I saw somebody on TikTok saying like, "Hey, we just jumped timelines. Just in case you're wondering, we just jumped timelines." I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Everything's fucking weird." It's like time doesn't make any sense anymore. Where it's like we're getting closer and closer to the singularity. But is the singularity? Are we gonna is reality gonna invert? And then all of a sudden we're all just light beings.
it feels that
I
way.
It'd be awesome if that happened. I would hope for something like that to happen instead of what I fear, And climate change is coming. I mean, that's going to ultimately, climate change is going to be the thing, the common enemy that's going to unite us all. But
I hope so. I really do. Because, I mean, that has to ultimately be it. If anything, it has to be climate change.
I just don't know. I
don't know. I don't know either. I'm skeptical that humanity is able
know.
to unite on anything as well, Heather. I really am. But I think, like, if there's anything, like anything at all, like anything conceptually, it has to be climate change, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it depends on the way that it's framed, because right now climate activists are framing it in terms of like total destruction, like humanity is going to be gone, right? Which is a very distinct possibility. Okay, the next 100 years, there's a very good chance it could happen. But when people are polled, they're more concerned. 80% of people actually said they were more concerned about humanity just being diminished than they are just totally not existing, which is very bizarre. And I don't really understand the explanation for it. But what that tells me is that, like, the success of climate change unifying us, right, is going to be about the message. And do we have anybody that's capable of like delivering the right message that will actually bring people together?
We do, but I would argue that's not the problem. The problem is those people are not allowed to have power.
Yes, or they don't have the money.
Right. Exactly. They don't have access to power because they don't have the money.
Right.
And that's the issue.
So yeah, I mean, that's why solidarity economics is actually a really cool thing to talk about with people, because it puts the agency back into the hands of local people, of local society. So for instance, you guys have your friend network. When the big San Andreas earthquake hits between now and 2030, you're going to have your friends who you're going to be able to all pool resources, and you may not have power for a few weeks. You'll be fine. You'll figure it out with your people. And that's the situation. Wherever you are, it's about removing the sort of the umbrella organizations, the management structure. It's about removing management. Management is unnecessary. We don't need to be managed. We manage ourselves just fine. It's just like the deer population. The deer population explodes until there's a predator to knock it back. That's it. It naturally manages itself. We're nature. We're not any better than nature. And so climate change is going to knock us back. And that's really great because, and maybe the aliens will knock us back too. Wouldn't that be great? So, but the ultra localization thing, I think, is the deal, right? It's like, get with your people, build action plans, start doing things. Like there's an organization up here called Cooperation Humboldt, and they sort of started this idea of solidarity economics on a kind of a national level. And they do things like they do little box gardens. So if you don't have a ton of space, they'll bring you a little box garden and set it up for you, and they'll even plant some stuff in it. You just have to maintain it, and it'll have herbs, not that much. But if all of a sudden every parking lot starts to get filled up with food, with like, oh, how did 5 tons of dirt end up on this public parking lot? I don't know. It happened in the middle of the night. Oh, there's a bunch of food in there.
My God, you're speaking my language. Guerrilla gardening.
Yep, exactly. Plant the shit on the side of the wall. Yep, exactly.
Everywhere. Can you talk a little bit more about that for our listeners, like the concept of guerrilla gardening and why it's so radical and why it's so important?
Oh yeah, it's because it's taking away a piece of empty land from a person who thinks they own it. And they get pissed off because they thought they owned that land that they were making their yearly rent on or whatever, or it was just sitting there and they thought it was an asset, and now it's an asset for the people, and they don't like that. But yeah, I think guerrilla gardening is great. It's starting. Yeah. I mean, there's some stuff in like Brooklyn where like people are just doing that. They're just taking over empty lots in between buildings, and just like planting food gardens. I think that's a great thing to do. I think everybody needs to go against local building codes and fill their front lawn with food if they could do it,
Yep.
I think that's
I
a
was
great plan.
watching this TikTok recently where there was this guy and he was just planting native poppies along the 405 freeway in Culver City.
That's awesome.
I've seen that.
Yep.
I've seen that. People just like toss them out their window too.
Yep.
Like when they're driving on the freeway, it's like, fuck it,
Yeah,
love
or
that.
like in downtown Los Angeles, people will grow pumpkins. They'll just start planting them at the beginning of the year, and then by October, you've got like these giant pumpkins right in the middle of downtown LA, and it's just fucking awesome.
That's awesome. And then they die back and then they volunteer the next year and they come right back. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like that critical mass of like, let's make it too much for the powers that be to handle. Like, and I don't think like the Fed can't manage every corner of this continent. The state of California can't manage every corner of California. It's too big. There's too much for them to manage. All they can do is manage the areas that are within their kind of like field of vision. If you're out of their field of vision, you can do anything. Like up here, we have all these Mexican cartels growing marijuana in the forest, and they've been free to operate for many, many years, completely unfettered. And it's just Mexican cartels growing marijuana in Northern California. I mean, it's just the way it's always been. They just keep doing it. And, every once in a while, a normal helicopter will fly over or whatever, or, some kind of like government agency helicopter will fly over and like they'll do a bust and they'll roll it all out and go, we got the bad guys. And then it just keeps going on like nothing happened. It's so hilarious. Anyway, yeah, just we have to be unmanageable. And maybe anarchy is a little helpful for that. Like in Portland, all those protests and stuff where those guys like are just like, we're just going to be in the street handing out food.
Or up in Seattle where they did that autonomous area for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chaz.
Yeah.
Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. I used to live up there.
But hey, did you guys hear that Seattle and Portland burned to the ground like 35 times?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because of the anarchists.
What was so crazy about that too, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that like when that was all going on, and then I ran for city council, I had all these people here, like in Camarillo, that they thought that was like going on here in Camarillo and in Ventura County. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? There were no riots. There was no burning. There was a peaceful BLM protest over in the park and like 15 people came.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, they thought there was going to be like riots at the outlets.
Yeah. No, they actually thought that had happened. And I was like, that never happened. Like, what? And it's like, hilarious. I learned that what it was they were never going outside. They were just spending all their time watching CNN and Fox News and the local Fox and what's the other one? MSNBC. Like, that's all they were doing was seeing what's on, and that like painted their picture of what was going on in our own community. And it wasn't. And then as soon as like I was able to show them that didn't happen, all of a sudden we could start having a conversation about like, what was going on, with housing or some bullshit at the farmer's market, stuff like that. And it's like they can't even get like to that point because they're watching so much news, of having that, we can't get to that point of having that conversation because of the news. It was really crazy.
Yeah. And Instacart and DoorDash are, they don't have to go outside of their house. They can just have shit delivered.
So I think part of the problem is, I just gave a presentation last night for work. One of the ladies that was there was like, I always have the news on because there's always something going on. And I was thinking in my head, no, there's not. The 24-hour news cycle has only came to be like in the last
Yeah.
50 years. There's not always something going on. Matter of fact, it's the opposite.
They just repeat the same shit hour over hour.
Yeah.
Yep. And they choose what to focus on.
Breaking news, but we've told you 600 times.
Yeah.
And it happened 8 hours ago.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they decide what we're going to pay attention to, So maybe part of it is getting off the boob box too, and just like going outside and going to the farmer's market and just sitting there and waiting for people to come up and have conversations and say, what's happening around me? Where the sky is blue today, and that's what's happening. That's the news. It doesn't need to be some crazy thing, but that ultra localization thing just keeps coming. It's like, you can only be where you are. And so you must just be where you are is ultimately what's going to solve the problem, I think.
Yep. No, I totally agree. Heather, do you have anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think this was a great conversation and I appreciate you coming. And I guess just our last question was, we've talked about all these things, but is there anything else that we can do to prepare or to educate? Is it about educating people? Is it about talking about this stuff? What is that to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. This has been really fun.
It's our pleasure.
Right on. I think that there's a couple things. I think, this idea of put your own mask on first and then you can help your neighbor. Getting yourself, your infrastructure set up is kind of the first step, right? So if you need an emergency stash of, say, like a year's worth of canned goods, or however much you can store in your spot, get that together. Get your little food garden going. Get everything you can do. Everything you can do. Get your Armageddon stash together. Get your life straw. Get all the things that you would need to survive for, say, 6 months or a year, if you can do that. And then start going out and preparing to help others, because as everything starts to kind of collapse, the older people particularly are going to be the ones who need the most help, and they're not going to be able to like do shit like go get an oxygen tank from the whatever the zombie apocalypse hospital. So you're going to have to go over to zombie apocalypse hospital and grab an oxygen tank for the old person that needs it. You're going to have to feed them from your stash. So get extra of everything, and it's not something that you have to like go and buy $1,000 worth of shit. Get a couple when you're at grocery outlet, get a couple extra cans of soup. That's it. They're like, a couple bucks a piece. You spend an extra $5, and then you just stick that in your Armageddon stash. And just over the course of time, all of a sudden you've got, a year's worth of supplies all stored up. So that's one thing you can do to sort of be ready. And then another thing is getting together with your people and talking to them about this stuff and saying, we need action plans. We need resource sharing plans. We need action plans. We need to know who's got what, like inventory everybody's resources. Like if you've got extra tools, or you've got a 3D printer, an extra 3D printer that doesn't work as well as the new one you got, you put that aside so you've got that. And everybody, you've got an inventory, like on a Google Doc or whatever, you got an inventory of everything that everybody's got. So if somebody needs something, and start the cycle of sharing that social infrastructure development now, and get the ball rolling of the infrastructural development, because it's social infrastructure that we need to be developing. It's not political infrastructure. So as if we start that cycle of like, oh, we're sharing this, we're sharing that, we're spending less, we're trying to get out of debt, we're sharing more. By the time the political infrastructure collapses, you will have superseded it anyway. You will have passed it up, and it will be unnecessary to you anyway. The only thing that we really have to pay for is utilities and the roof over your head, right? So figuring that out Another thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about was community ownership of land. But community ownership of land is a huge one. If you could go in with a group of people on an empty piece of land and turn that into like a co-op, or like a spot where an escape hatch could essentially sit for you, that's like a huge thing, because then you could go out there and start planting plants that really don't need maintenance. You could plant a bunch of shit like pumpkins, squash, cucumbers, lettuce, shit that'll just grow on its own. And it's just out there, and you just plant a dickload of it, as much as you possibly can. And it's just growing for you. And when you need to go out there and grab it, and group ownership, that's the thing. We all own it together. It's not like, oh, this was mine and I'll share it with you if I feel like it. It's not like that. It's like, this belongs to all of us. This is what should have happened when we integrated with the Native Americans. We should have just integrated, as opposed to saying, you need to give us what you have. They're like, it's not ours. You can't take what isn't yours. It's like, anyway. So those are some things.
That's awesome.
Right on. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, thank you so much for being here. You shared so much brilliant wisdom. How
Right
can
on.
people
Thank
get
you.
in touch with you?
They could get in touch with me on TikTok. That would be an easy way to do it. Let me see if I can change the name of my thing real quick so they could. Oh, I tried to. It didn't work. I'm at Zack Preston Rouse. You can find me. And they could also email me if they want to. They could email me at ziggity1@gmail.com. I'll keep that email for a few years.
Cool. Thank you so much. As
Cool.
always,
Thanks for having me, you guys. You're awesome.
No, you're awesome. I hope we have you back on again, and I'd love to have you on one of our panels.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Just give me some homework and I'll do some research and find some new shit to talk about.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
You got it. Thanks so much.
Awesome. You guys
All right,
rock.
take
Talk
care.
to you later.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
As always, the 805 Uncensored is on all the major social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as well. If you have any questions, comments, guest ideas, or episode suggestions, go ahead and shoot us an email, 805uncensored@gmail.com. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good night, morning, evening, wherever you're listening in the world, and stay safe out there.